We've all heard that the Great Wall of China was built to keep out invaders. But even the longest man-made structure on Earth has to end somewhere. So what do those ends look like? And couldn't invaders just go around? First of all, there isn't one Great Wall. Lots of Chinese dynasties built walls, some going back thousands of years, like the Han Great Wall, which was built between roughly 200 BCE and 200 CE. But it's the Great Wall built in the Ming dynasty which is most well known, with its distinctive architecture. The Ming dynasty was established in 1368 by the Hongwu Emperor, a man who has one of the most impressive stories of social mobility that I've ever heard. The Hongwu Emperor was born into a poor peasant family. He was orphaned as a teenager before he became a monk, and he often had to beg for food. As an adult, he joined a rebellion. He rose through the ranks, and eventually he overthrew the Mongol Yuan dynasty before becoming Emperor of China himself. But the Mongols were not completely defeated. They retreated north into modern-day Mongolia. They renamed themselves the Northern Yuan, and they remained a problem for the Ming with periodic raids into China. Here is a map of the Ming dynasty that I've managed to get my hands on. It shows the Ming dynasty's borders both in the earlier stage of the empire and in the later stage of the empire. There's also a map of the later Qing dynasty, but that's for another time. This map is old, it's seen better days. It doesn't have the publishing date on it like most modern maps do, but I can tell that it's at least 70 years old because it has a lot of traditional characters on it, which weren't simplified in mainland China until 1956. So this map must be older than that. It does say though that it was printed by Shanghai New Asia Bookstore Publishing, so we know it's from mainland China. This map shows the borders of the Ming Empire, and north of the border is where the remaining Mongol tribes were after they were defeated by the Ming. On the right hand side of the map, where the red line that marks the border stops, this area is modern-day Dongbei region. At the time, this area was a vassal state which paid tribute to the Ming, and it was home to the Jurchens, a group of people who would later rename themselves the Manchus. The Ming exercised control over this area in the earlier stage, but gradually in the later stage they lost control of it, which you can kind of see in this map of the later stage. You can also see on these maps the location of the Great Wall, and in the earlier Ming map you can see that the border with the Mongols is much further north than the Great Wall. The Hongwu Emperor led several attempts to conquer the Northern Yuan. They did conquer some land, but ultimately they were unable to keep it and they were pushed back. Walls and fortifications were built during these campaigns. The Hongwu Emperor had outer garrisons and inner forts built, but their main purpose was offensive, not defensive. But as the Ming were pushed back, focus shifted to using the forts for defensive purposes, and the inner line of forts were gradually fortified, built up and connected, becoming what we now know today as the Great Wall of China. Now, looking at the later map of the Ming, you can see that the border of Mongolia is much further south, and that's because the Ming have been pushed back. And if you look closely, you can see that the Great Wall is the border. The Chinese for Great Wall today is Changcheng, which means the long city. But this term comes from earlier dynasties, and the Ming didn't use it because it had negative connotations of forced labor. So instead the Ming called it the Bianqiang, which simply meant the border wall. Over the centuries, the Mongols, as well as the Jurchens, exploited gaps in the walls and continued to attack and raid the Ming, which led the Ming to try and fill as many of the gaps in the walls that they could. It's important to remember though that not all the gaps in the wall could be filled. There are gaps in the wall, especially where the wall meets a natural barrier. For example, in Guanhekou in Shanxi province, where the Great Wall runs right up to the Yellow River, stops, and then continues again on the other side. Eventually though, they ended up making well over 8,000 kilometers of wall. Gaps aside, all those walls and fortifications have to end somewhere, There has to be a point beyond which there is no more wall, which leads me to my question. Where? Where does the Great Wall end? And couldn't invaders just go around? Okay, I know what you're thinking, that would be a damn long walk or ride. Yeah, for sure, but for curiosity's sake, humor me. So first, let's look east to China's border with North Korea. I've come to Dandong City, which lies on the border between China and North Korea. So behind me there's a river, that's the Yalu River, and that marks the border between the two countries, and it's possibly been the border for centuries, going as far back as maybe the middle of the 14th century, but definitely the 15th century. And this is one of the few places where you can catch a rare glimpse into life in North Korea. So you can see North Korea on the other side, and it looks completely different to the Chinese side, that's for sure. Over on this side, it's much more lively. You get a lot more people are walking around, there's a lot more traffic on the road. But on that side, it's a ghost town. You can't see anything, there's nobody, absolutely no activity whatsoever. But I haven't come here to talk about North Korea yet. I've come here to find the end of the Great Wall. And if you follow the river upstream that way, eventually you come to a hill where you can see the eastern end of the Great Wall. So this here is Kushan, which means Tiger Hill or Tiger Mountain. And it's the eastern terminus of the Great Wall. And it runs right up to the border with North Korea. I can just see the river over there, that's the Yalu River, which is the border between North Korea and China. And the Great Wall comes very, very close to it. So I followed the wall down all the way to the end, and it's taking me to this little spot here where right there, with that ledge, just beyond there, there's no more wall, so this is the very end of the Great Wall. However, this stretch of the Great Wall wasn't discovered until 1989. And the wall that I'm standing on today is a reconstruction that was built in 1992. So this is not an authentic piece of the Great Wall. Moreover, this particular stretch of wall, the Liaodong Biantiang, the Liaodong border wall, is not considered to be a part of the main branch, but rather it is an offshoot of the Great Wall. Back to the map for a moment. Here on this map of the Ming Empire, you can see that this section of the Great Wall is marked differently. That's because this is not considered to be a part of the main branch of the Great Wall, but rather it's an offshoot. This is in line with other maps which not only show this stretch of the Great Wall as marked differently, but also label it differently as the Liaodong Biantiang, or the Liaodong border wall. And some maps of the Ming Dynasty which were created at the time of the Ming Dynasty don't even show this stretch of the Great Wall at all, even though it did exist at that time, which shows that it just wasn't regarded in the same way as the main Great Wall. The Liaodong border wall was built to protect Han settlers who moved north of the main wall from Jurchen and Mongol raiders. Remember, in the Ming Dynasty, this part of China was a vassal state. And in 1616, the Jurchens rebelled against the Ming in what is now referred to in Chinese as the Manchu Uprising, the Manzhou de Xingqi. And in 1619, they broke through the Liaodong border wall, taking control of Ming territory within it. So this stretch of the Great Wall was not able to keep out invaders. The Liaodong border wall is considered to have been a part of the Great Wall of China, and this is considered to be the literal geographical eastern end of the Great Wall. But the Liaodong border wall has something of a different status. It's considered to be an offshoot rather than the main branch. So to see the symbolic end of the Great Wall, we need to go to where the Great Wall meets the sea. This right here is where the Great Wall meets the sea and comes to an abrupt end.
This behind me is called Lowlands in Chinese, which means the old dragon's head. And it's called that because it supposedly resembles a dragon drinking from the sea. Now, if the Great Wall were a dragon, this indeed would be its head, because this is the easternmost end of the main branch of the Great Wall. So you might be thinking, well, can't you just get in a boat and go around? But if you're a horde of Mongolian horsemen or an army of Manchus, then getting all of those horses and soldiers onto boats and switching to an amphibious attack, well, that's going to be a huge logistical challenge. So what you would need to do is you'd probably need to go through one of the passes in the wall, one of the gates. So if we follow the wall up that way, it will lead us to the first pass in the Great Wall. Following the wall inland just a few kilometers, you come to this fortress in the Great Wall. This is Shanhai Guan. Shan means mountain, Hai means sea, Shanhai Guan. This is the mountain sea fort. And if you look over there, you can see the mountains where the Great Wall continues to go over. And we've just come from the sea. So this is the narrowest part of what is called the Liaoxi corridor. It's also known as Tianxia Di Guan, which means the first pass under heaven. It was built in 1381, but even after its construction in 1381, more fortifications were happening as a military town grew around it. Although as well fortified as this place was, it did actually play a critical role in the downfall after Ming. In 1644, a rebellion in China overthrew the Ming Empire and took the capital, Beijing. A Ming general, Wu Sangui, was passing through Shanhai Guan on his way to Beijing when he got the news that the emperor had hanged himself. And so he and his army decided to garrison here at Shanhai Guan while they decided what to do. Now, Wu Sangui was a very powerful general who had the power to decide the fate of China. Both the rebels from within and the Manchus without were trying to convince him to join their side. They were both trying to win him over. But the rebels got desperate. They kidnapped some of Wu Sangui's family in Beijing and took them hostage in an attempt to force him to side with them. But this angered Wu Sangui, and so he decided to side with the Manchus instead. And he opened the gates, allowing the Manchu army to come in, who defeated the rebels in a battle here in Shanhai Guan. But then they went on to conquer all of China and found the Qing dynasty, closing the door on the Ming dynasty for good.
Now that we've seen the eastern ends of the Great Wall, it's time to turn west.
Following the wall as it winds westwards, you eventually come out to the deserts of Gansu. This is the Gobi Desert, and it is dry and it is desolate. It is a world away from the sea and Shanhai Guan. This here is the Xuanbi Changchang, which means the overhanging wall, and it's called that because the wall apparently floats over the cliffs. You can see that the wall here looks remarkably similar to stretches of the wall in other places, but here the terrain is completely different. Everything is yellow, everything is brown, and so it gives it a completely different look. But I've come here to find the western end of the wall. I showed you the eastern end, and at the eastern end there's Shanhai Guan, a fort in the wall, a pass in the wall. And from here, if we follow the wall a bit further, there's another one. This here is Jiayuguan, and it is the first pass in the Great Wall if you're coming in from the west. On the east side, you have Shanhai Guan, and it has the name, the first pass under heaven, Tianxia Diyuguan. Not to be outdone, Jiayuguan has the name Tianxia Di Xiongguan, which means the first and greatest pass under heaven. This was built in the Ming dynasty during the reign of the Hongwu Emperor in 1372, and it's one of the best preserved parts of the wall. And its construction actually has a pretty remarkable story. The architect and engineer of Jiayuguan, his name was Yi Kaijian. He designed it, and then when he gave the plans to his superiors, he said he needed a very precise number of bricks to build it. 99,999. His supervisors were skeptical. They said, how could you be so precise with that number? And he said, okay, fine, just to be safe, add 1. Bring it to an even number, and we've got 1 left over, just in case. And so they built it, and then after construction, lo and behold, there was precisely 1 brick left over. And they took that brick and they put it on a ledge near the west gate, where it has remained ever since to this day. Jiayuguan was a gateway on the old Silk Roads, which was connected by a series of oasis towns. Jiayuguan was one such oasis town. It was built here because it's close to a rare water source. And travelers on the Silk Road would have passed through this gate. This is the west gate, and this would have been the way in and out. But it wasn't just pilgrims and merchants that passed through this gate. Also, people who were banished and exiled from China would have walked through it. And you can still see on the walls some of the inscriptions and carvings that many of those who were banished wrote on the walls on their way out. One such person who was exiled was Lin Zexu, who in 1839 took the opium that the British were smuggling into China and threw it into the sea. The British reacted by going to war with China in what we now know as the Opium War. Lin Zexu was used as a scapegoat, and he was blamed for the war, and he was banished from China proper. And he walked through this gate on his way to exile in Xinjiang. 5 years later, though, they pardoned him and he was allowed back. But not everybody was so lucky. Many of those who were exiled walked through this gate, never to be seen again. Following the wall one final time, and it brings you out to here, and this is it. This is the westernmost point of the Great Wall. This is the end of the Great Wall. And the wall here, it goes right up to a canyon. And you can see, looking at it, that is no easy place to march an army through.
This stretch of Great Wall closes off the narrowest part of the Hexi corridor, which is the only easily navigable piece of land in between the Tibetan and Mongolian plateaus. To get through, you would have had to go through Jiayuguan, which was at the center of a network of military bases which kept the area secure at the western end of the Great Wall.
While it's a myth that the Great Wall is one unbroken, completely connected structure, there are gaps in it, especially when it comes up to natural barriers. Still, it's amazing to think that I'm standing at the tail end of the longest and largest construction in human history.
So what do the ends of the Great Wall look like? And why couldn't invaders just go around? Well, the wall runs right up to a number of natural barriers. A river, the desert, the sea, a canyon, all of which would have posed a serious challenge to any invading force. Meaning that the Great Wall was a significant barrier which was hard to avoid, and any invading force would have had to reckon with it either by breaching it by force or conspiring with someone on the inside to open a gate. Although there was a time when the Manchus did breach the Great Wall by force, but that's a story for another time.